are, Martin Brundle, several queuing up to take the honours.
Absolutely, at least a four-way shootout, and you could never write off Bottas and Raikkonen either. So I imagine the Mercedes and the Ferrari have got a little bit of extra power they can turn up. It's less effective around here than some of the super high-speed tracks, but you still would never give away any horsepower if you could help it. And the Red Bull hasn't got enough pace through the corners to make the difference. And I believe they were running a little bit of fuel this morning as well, Red Bull, in free practice 3 earlier today, I should say. So we're expecting it to be very close indeed. And it's time to get brave up against the wall to minimise the angle of the corner. Minimise the braking distances to leave nothing on the table. Build up Q1, leave a bit of a margin. Q2 getting very important. Q3 all out. You've got to go for it, and that is when we're going to see them grazing the walls, and maybe more than that.
Ariana Grande belting out some of her biggest tunes in the Padang area. The concert crowd jam-packed in down there and very much on song so far this weekend. The Red Bull team, who've led every practice session over the weekend, and the first time they've done that since India 2013, when they won from pole position with Sebastian Vettel, who goes into this race trailing Lewis Hamilton in the championship for the first time this season. Just 3 points in it, with Valtteri Bottas, that man there, in third place, and Daniel Ricciardo fourth ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. Only 3 points between the two Force India drivers, Perez and Ocon. It's getting very, very tight out in front, Martin Brundle, and the worry, I suppose, for Mercedes, the championship leaders in both championships at the moment. Got a bit of hope from Lewis Hamilton, who put in a very good lap just before the end of FP3.
It's close enough. It's too difficult to call, but I don't see Mercedes really out of sorts like they were 2 or 3 years back here, when they just couldn't find the way around this racetrack.
Yeah, they got a bit of hope from Lewis Hamilton, who put in a very good lap just before the end of FP3 earlier this evening, and was only a tenth and a half off the pace by the end of it. Let's give you some qualifying pointers from Mark Hughes of Motorsports magazine. And Mark says, even with an engine mode advantage in Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes could be on the back foot for pole. Mercedes taking 10 poles out of 13 in 2017. Will Ferrari's qualifying power advantage over the Red Bull Renault overcome Red Bull's chassis performance? We'll see in a few moments' time. And if Q2 can be completed on super softs, it gives you a longer first stint and a wider range of strategy options. It's what Red Bull did last season here.
Yeah, and they had a very good run pace as well. But if you make an error, you know, don't write off Perez in the Force India, or Ocon, or Hulkenberg in the Renault. They're having a pretty good weekend as well. There was a Porsche in the Super Cup race that caught fire, and the driver decided that, although it was turn 3, he really ought to get the car back to the pits very sensibly, and he has left some debris, and they are expecting the track, residue's the right word, to be quite slippery. Turn 20, I believe it was.
And turn 20 is where we've seen Max Verstappen particularly getting all out of sorts and out of shape so far this weekend. You can make up a lot of time if you get that corner right.
Yeah.
If you've got a bit of a slippery surface there, that is not going to do you any favours. We've got 1,600 lights illuminating this track. This is the light I like the most, Martin, the green one. That means that we can start qualifying and we can get this session underway. And it's Pascal Wehrlein, first man out onto the track for Sauber. His teammate, Marcus Ericsson, will start at the back of the grid, we assume, because he's got a 5-place grid penalty for changing his gearbox after his crash in FP3.
Straight onto the psychedelic ultra softs then for Kimi Raikkonen in the Ferrari, the softest tyre available all year, and certainly, of course, then available here. You can see it now for yourself.
Yeah, soft, strong, but not necessarily very, very long. It's how in the race you can keep these tyres from overheating that will dictate your performance advantage, and the Ferrari's been a very good car in recent races and recent history in keeping those tyres alive and not getting too hot.
They somehow managed to run them very low on low fuel still. They'll put 105 kilograms in for the race, and the kinematics and the clever systems they've got on the suspension keeps the car very low to the ground. But of course they're in parc fermé conditions now for the race, so they'll have new skid blocks on as well. That's why you see a lot of sparking in the early phase of qualifying, and of course it'll be ever more visible under the darkness to an extent here in Singapore, although there are one or two sort of darkish patches. There's one as you head into turn 5 there, but in other parts of the racetrack it's brighter than a grey day at Silverstone, for example.
Some close qualifying battles this season, particularly at Toro Rosso, where Carlos Sainz leads Danny Kvyat 7-6. Romain Grosjean 8-5 up on his teammate Kevin Magnussen. Lewis Hamilton 8-5 up on his teammate Valtteri Bottas. Jolyon Palmer still needs to out-qualify his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. He's the only driver who hasn't done that in 2017.
How do they make sure it never rains here, Crofty? I can't believe it's the 10th race here. They talk about seeding the clouds and somehow stopping the rain. We've never had a wet race, have we?
Yeah.
Yet it thunders all night long, doesn't it? You can't sleep.
I think it's testament to the fact that nothing gets into a Formula One Grand Prix without the appropriate accreditation. So even the rain, Ted Kravitz, is kept at bay, at least for the next hour and a half.
Hello, Crofty.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. I was going to tell you about some people on their back foot going into this session.
Really?
Yeah, sorry. Do you want me to talk about the rain and the old seeding the clouds?
Well, we often think that the clouds do get a certain amount of help not to spill their watery deposits.
No, it does rain here more or less every day,
Yes.
but it happens when the whole Formula One community is asleep, i.e. around midday. So, yeah, it's not really a factor for us. But let's talk about Williams. Now, I know I referred to them a little bit earlier about how they're struggling. Really, it's just down to a lack of downforce. The setup, they tell me, is actually okay. The balance is okay, but they just don't have the downforce that you need round here. And, of course, with the strength that we've seen McLaren in that area come through, Renault come up as well, Toro Rosso not so bad. I'm afraid it is those teams, Williams, Sauber, and potentially Toro Rosso, looking like they're in their back heel, if that's a phrase, which it isn't, on their back foot going into the session. Maybe they're going to be some of the Q1 dropouts. Let's see.
Yeah, Williams really need to get their act together for next year. They have that Mercedes-Benz engine. Force India are doing a good job with it on a similar budget. It's an engine. I mean, we've just seen McLaren and Toro Rosso and maybe even Red Bull doing a pass-to-parcel with engines, and none of them really want to open the parcel, do they? They would all love that customer Mercedes engine, and somehow Williams have got to put that to better use.
So come on then, Paddy Lowe, with us on the pit wall, Chief Technical Officer at Williams. What have you got up your sleeve, and I hope they're very long sleeves, for this weekend, to stop you getting knocked out of Q1 with both cars for a 4th race in 6?
Well, thanks for that introduction.
We thought we'd...
Without overheating the rears, and that's the trick.
It's terribly confusing, isn't it? I'm confused by that. I don't really understand that. And frustrating, I'd imagine, for you, Paddy. You can't, instead of focusing on setting the car up, you've just got 95% of your effort is going into the surface temperature of the tyre.
You still need to do all the other stuff, just...
feet for the majority of these 3.1 miles as Fernando Alonso goes very, very wide.
So, you know, there's no excuses for not getting the car set up in the right place.
Well,
that's got to be done too.
Well, Paddy, good luck for this session. We'll be with you a little bit later on. Let's see if we can get... Cheers, Paddy. Felipe Massa, who was on pole here for the first Singapore Grand Prix in 2008, and Lance Stroll, who is racing here for the first time, somewhere out of Q1 into safely Q2. McLaren, as we look at Fernando Alonso here, the surprise, really, of the morning session. Both cars in the top 5, and desperate to prove that McLaren chassis is, well, as Fernando Alonso said yesterday, worth enough for a P1.
Yeah, it should be a better circuit for them. They do tend to show more of their potential in free practice than other teams, and they don't have too far to go then in qualifying, but I still wouldn't be at all surprised to see at least one of them in the top 10 shootout. We keep seeing yellow flags showing up around the circuit.
It's Roman Grosjean on both occasions.
Last section was okay, but I'm not confident. It seems like the oil is not only there, it's a bit everywhere in last section.
Well, as you said, Martin, that Porsche that was on fire did... through the final turn, finishes in 10th place with that time at... Whoa, dear. Sorry, that's second place for Fernando Alonso, actually, a 1:44.1.
Yeah, the track's obviously...
I'm okay at qualifying, really. I don't like the fact you've out-qualified me 9 times this season. I'm going to stay with you, my friend, and he goes quickest.
Yeah, with that oily residue down there, this track is going to keep moving all through Q1, right up until the end, and maybe through half of Q2 as well, until these cars hoover it up and start laying some Pirelli rubber down.
Kimi Raikkonen set the fastest first sector time. His teammate Sebastian Vettel third fastest as he crosses the line. Raikkonen at the moment just going through turn 10 as we ride on board with Lewis Hamilton. Now Hamilton through the first sector at 27.6 with 2 tenths down on Kimi.
Really slippery in 20.
So remember, the cars are 2 meters wide this year. They're up from 1.8 meters, 11% wider. Then the drivers have to make a little bit more of an allowance, but I must say that tends to be an instinctive automatic thing. But